think first thing I want to dive into is just a little bit about yourself. I guess tell the world like how you got on this path of finding the universe within. How did you find the inspiration to just reach out to people and have some introspective conversations? How did you align yourself with this certain kind of lifestyle, this path, and why do you do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and it's yeah, I guess that's always the big question is who we are, where we came from. But I ever since I can remember, I was very interested in spirituality and religion and in these questions of who am I, why are we all here, what the hell is going on. So I think there was something in me that just really had this longing to answer these kind of questions. And so I got very interested in all sorts of different spiritual disciplines, martial arts, yoga, Tai Chi, just really consuming as much kind of spiritual literature as I could, very fascinated in religions and kind of seeing the commonalities between them. I got very interested in plant medicine, in herbalism and traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, things like that. And eventually that led me down to the Amazon because I became very interested in kind of the way I was working with herbalism was much more in that kind of traditional allopathic sense of using plants to treat a symptom, to try and find the cure of it. But I had known for a long time and been very interested in more of this shamanic way of looking at things, that health wasn't just necessarily on the physical, that there was a mental emotional component to it and also a spiritual component, something that was experiential, that could be tapped into through various practices, but very much so through plants. And so that led me down to the Amazon, where I became really interested in working with ayahuasca. And that was a really kind of profound experience that I had. And serendipitously, I ended up staying in the Amazon, and that was about 10 years ago. And I've pretty much been there ever since. So really working deeply with that plant particular, and doing a long process of not only working with that plant, but really beginning to learn from it in kind of the traditional way that the people who work with these plants do that work. It's often referred to as dieting, going into a period of isolation, of fasting, and working with these plants to experience something. And I think that's it's a very different concept than a lot of people are used to, which is this idea of having a direct experience of something. And that really fascinated me. And so I continued working with ayahuasca, other plants, tobacco especially, which may sound strange to a lot of viewers because often when we think of tobacco, we're thinking of like cigarettes or smoking, but in the Amazon, that's considered one of the main plant teachers. And when you ingest it in its liquid form, it's a very powerful plant. And eventually I find myself just doing that work more and more, beginning to find myself on the other end of that, not just experiencing it, but beginning to work as someone who guides in that experience. And then to kind of get to your question about the podcast, it was something I thought about doing for a long time, because I felt there was really a lack of quality information out there about how this work was really being done and what the roots of it were. So it was really the design was to give people a platform, people who I have a lot of respect for and who I think can be good ambassadors of this work, and not just plant work, but again, for me, I think all of these paths are pointing towards something very, very unique and very similar. And so trying to get good knowledge and wisdom out there. And the title, The Universe Within, it was actually an ode to one of my first teachers, whose name was Dr. David Jubbs, and he used to do a series called the Universe Inside. So I didn't want to just completely copy his name, so I based it on that, the Universe Within, and that's how that started.
That's awesome, man. So did you have that direct experience with ayahuasca and then came out of it and said, "Wait a second, I gotta do something with this. You know, I can't just let this dwell in the past." Like, did you come out of that and say, "I need to tell the world, or I need to work with this thing more"?
Um, I think there's always it's something that the more I do this work, we often warn people about, which is kind of this like evangelical proselytizing quality of sometimes when we have these really big or direct experiences, there is this kind of desire to want to share it with the world, because it can be something that's very life changing, very just a complete shift of our perception of the world. I think I had that to some degree, but that wasn't where the podcast came out of, because that was close to 10 years ago when that happened. But again, it was more of a serendipitous thing where the place where I experienced that at was looking for people to come down and to help to run this center. So I found myself just kind of on the other side of that, of beginning to help to work with the indigenous healers and to help guide those ceremonies. And the podcast is about a year old now, so that was kind of fast forwarding 9 years. And that really came when I felt I had a better grasp of what was going on, and I also felt there was a need to give myself to some extent, but even more so other people, a platform to begin to share that knowledge. But that it didn't really come until it was interesting because it coincided with the whole pandemic that we've been going through. And um, my work schedule was very intense. I was in the Amazon, so the internet connection is other than the best. But because of the pandemic, I found myself outside of the Amazon, where I am now here in the Peruvian Andes. And I found myself with more time and also with a better internet connection. And I was also interviewed by a couple of friends of mine, and it just there was something inside me that said, "Okay, this is the time to do it."
Mm, that's awesome, man. Now, how many times have you done ayahuasca, you think?
I really don't know. It's a question I've been asked before, and it's not something I've ever kept track of, but a lot of times, because a big part of my work was facilitating ayahuasca ceremonies, so kind of being the bridge between the healers. In the local language, they're often referred to as a curandero, one who cures, one who heals. They can also be referred to as a medico, a doctor,
A shaman?
vegetalista, someone who works with plants, a shaman, absolutely. So kind of acting as the bridge between them and the guests who were coming down, who tend to be predominantly more from Western cultures, places like the US, Canada, Europe, Australia. So kind of acting as that bridge, because it's, for many people, it is a very different worldview. It's a very different cosmovision. So to be able to help to facilitate that process, to kind of translate in a language that most of us are more familiar with, what may be going on, what may be happening with their experience. So part of that process was drinking quite regularly, one for my own experience, to be able to have an experiential understanding of what's actually happening in that process, and then also within that ceremonial context, working with ayahuasca as well as part of being that bridge. So um, I've drank a lot, but it it also depends. There's a real difference between drinking for oneself, kind of going and doing that internal work, versus drinking in a ceremonial context to be able to kind of tap into that space and that energy.
Hmm. Yeah, you mentioned before how you said how important it is for you to go through the diet and prepare for the ceremony. Do you think that's necessary? Like, if I just ordered some ayahuasca to my house, which anybody can do, by the way, not recommending it, but you could. If I just ordered it to my house and decided to make ayahuasca, um, how much different would you say that experience is than if I were to go through like a ceremony at your place?
Well, you can. You can order the ingredients. You can also order the brew. I mean, I'm sure now you can find online how to prepare it, how to cook it, but it would be very different. And I think to many people, that may not make a lot of sense. It's like if you can go online and find a recipe of how to prepare chamomile tea. You get the flowers and you add hot water and you let it steep for a while, and then you have this brew. But I think the thing that separates a lot of what we would call plant medicines or teacher plants is that they're not just operating on the physical realm. There's a component where they have a tremendous ability to heal physical ailments, but they also have an ability to heal mental, emotional things that we're working on. And on another level, they take us into this realm of spirit, which may be kind of difficult for some people to understand, but this deeper connection about who we are, where we come from, what our place in the world is, what our place in the universe is. And so when preparing that medicine or any of these very strong medicines, it's not just the physical component of how to prepare that. It's not just as simple as I add X amount of this and Y amount of this, and then I have ayahuasca. Um, there's so many factors of where do I get that medicine from? How old is the vine? Where are the leaves coming from? What's the ratio that I do it? When do I prepare it? How do I prepare it? Am I fasting during that process when I'm cooking it? Am I working with other plants like tobacco and blessing it? Am I singing to it? What's my intention?
Hmm.
What's the work I've done that's gone into my process to be able to prepare that? And that may sound crazy, but again, it's a very common thing that I'll hear is even people have worked with maybe ayahuasca in Boston, let's say, and they may have even had a very good experience, and then they come down to the jungle and work with doctors who have done this work their whole lives, and almost universally there's a very similar experience where they say like, oh, this is what this medicine is about. Like what I
Hmm.
experienced was great, it was beneficial, but it's a whole nother ball game of what's being experienced now. So I mean, that's so one could order it or prepare it oneself, but it would be a very different experience. And an analogy that I and others often use is, ultimately this work, I think you can relate it to something like heart surgery, and maybe even more so. And in that way, like, of course, you could perform open heart surgery on yourself. That's a possibility. Would that be recommended? Probably not. You
Hmm.
may be able to do it. You may have some amazing experiences, but you're also potentially opening yourself up to having a not so good experience. And so I think, like anything, when we're going into something as deep and profound as an open heart surgery, you would really want to work with a doctor who knows how to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. It's like you need the literal guide, like the navigator, to go and navigate these spirit worlds or the spirit world. And that is like it goes beyond rational concept to really say that to somebody that hasn't experienced that. But I mean, I guess if you know that that's how it has to be, then I could totally see that making sense. Like, yes, of course I need these people here to like almost guide me through because it's I feel like the ayahuasca, DMT, psilocybin realm at high doses is so far disconnected from the Western world and our ideals and how we've been brought up and how our mind has been conditioned that if you go into those experiences with just just trying it out maybe one day just for fun, it's probably not going to be too fun. Most likely, it's going to throw you a curveball, what you really think you are, what your whole being is, and what it means to be a human being, and the list goes on. It's just going to be so far. There's no words to explain it. There's no rational concept to really explain it. But the problem is our Western world relies on that rationality, that kind of like I have to explain these things and I have to just like a sense of like logic when sometimes these things are just they go beyond that, like that paradigm that we built up. And it's I totally agree with you, like with the set and setting, the idea of set and setting is so important. It really is. It's more than just the substance. It's more than just the chemical. It's the whole package of the psychedelic experience. It's the whole thing that brings us to I don't know, what would you say? So we need the guides, we need the navigation, right? What are they guiding us to? What is this navigation for, if you could explain it? So what is the difference, would you say, if you could explain between doing a solo trip, making some ayahuasca brew in your house, and then actually having the guidance? Like what would you say personally you've gotten more out of the ceremonial aspect of it rather than just say doing it yourself?
Well, I think an important thing to always remember is where do these plants and these traditions come from, and they're not isolated things. And so, like anything, to extract something without understanding that, as you said, the set and setting from which they come from, is very naive in a way, and in a way, I think you could even look at it as stealing in a way.
Mm,
You're taking one aspect of something, but not understanding the entire picture. Even if you can order ayahuasca, you didn't make that. So,
mm,
it's you're already getting it from somewhere else. Even if you brew it, where did that knowledge come from of how it was brewed? None of that is just free. None of that is like your own doing. It comes from a very long lineage of whether that's trial and error or other people's direct experiences, other people's traditions. So I think in a way to not honor that is in a way very disrespectful. And it's not just with ayahuasca. I think if you look at any of these plants, whether that's mushrooms or um, working with marijuana, or even in a lot of Western culture, I think there's a growing body of evidence of the sacredness that a lot of these plants were pointing towards. I think a really good book, if your audience hasn't heard of it, is Brian. I think his name is Brian Moresco. He wrote a really good book recently called The Immortality Key, about how potentially even the origins of things like Christianity were based on plant medicine sacraments. And I think something that all of these things share, whether you look at Judaic early rites or Vedic rites, you look in more of a Western context of the rites of Ulysses or the Dionysian rites. It was never just one person who was taking these things by themselves. There was always a ceremonial context. There was always a tremendous amount of preparation. I mean, you look at Ulysses, and it was like something people would do once in their lives, and they did a tremendous amount of preparation and pilgrimage and sacrifice and eventually this elaborate ritual. And as they would describe, it was so that they could die in order to be reborn. And I think that's a really common motif in a lot of these traditions, even ayahuasca. That's a Quechua word, and it means vine of the dead. And I think a lot of people disregard that, but it's something you see in shamanic traditions all over the world. Is I think if you had to boil it down to one common motif, the motif would be death. And the idea being that these plants, these rituals, these rites are taking us into our death, which is something that we're very, I think in a lot of the cultures we come from, it's something we really push away. It's
mm-hmm.
not something we talk about. It's not something we really want to ponder. It's something we almost avoid at all costs. I think the current pandemic we're in is a prime example of that. We're in a way shutting down life, trying to avoid death because there's so much fear around that, because it's not something that we've really gone into deeply. And so, to answer your question, like why are those rites and rituals so important? It's because that's how that knowledge was passed down, and it's a very different thing if we're just doing something recreationally. And there's nothing wrong with doing something recreationally. All of these plants can be worked with in different ways. There's all sorts of different plants that can be worked with. But again, throughout history, these very powerful plants were always used in a very specific way, in a way that commanded a lot of respect, a lot of ritual, a lot of sacrifice, in order to experience the essence of what these plants were actually trying to teach. And It's not inherently just to have a nice vision and to see some things and then go and tell your buddies that, oh, this was a great experience and you should really do it. Ultimately, it was an extremely, extremely challenging experience that was bringing us into this death-like state so that we could truly be alive, so that we could truly be happy, be joyful, experience bliss, experience love, experience peace, experience contentment, connection, union. I think all of these words that all of these spiritual traditions are pointing towards, which is at the root of what these things are trying to get to. But we can only get to that through I think a real understanding and a knowledge of, as you said, the set and setting of how these things were worked with.
Hmm. Well said. Yeah, I see them as tools. I mean, the whole experience is a tool. It's a tool to reprogram our mind and reprogram, maybe quite literally rewire our brains so that we kind of reach a different view on why we're here, how we're here. Might not have it all figured out, but at least we have a different perspective to look at life at. And I think that's kind of what these things do. And that whole rebirth experience for me is a rebirth of how I view myself. It's not like I literally physically die and come back to life, even though it may feel like that sometimes in these ecstatic states. But it's like a sense of, it's almost like a simulation of death, of who you thought you were, or how you thought the world was. And then you do become, in a sense, reborn with a different viewpoint of the world. But it's like everything is different, but it's all the same. It's hard to explain. It's just really changing up how you, I guess, respond to things, how you view things, how you view your own life. It's really just switching like I said, you switch the viewpoint up on your life. You totally, for me at least, I went through, large amounts of psilocybin, and from those heroic doses, it's like it showed me a different way, showed me a different, um, it's a different path of life. And then from there, that's cool. I had the experience, but that never leaves me. Like I forever will have that in the back of my head, that ultimately that death experience. And then, oh, I had the death experience, but I'm still here. I'm still okay. Like it's okay. It's like once you confront your own demise in this body, your own death, your own perishing, you almost like simulating it in a way. You become reborn as it's like a being that seems to be with a little less fear. I'm not going to say I don't have fear. Maybe I just see fear in like a different light now, where I mean, I'm not going to say I don't fear death, because I think we all do deep down, but I have a different viewpoint of what that is. It's not exactly like an endpoint. It's not exactly like taboo as we like to think of it in our culture. More so, it's like embracing it now, knowing that it's inevitable, and knowing that maybe the journey goes on. Maybe it's not the end per se. Maybe we just become reborn again. Maybe we just metamorphosize into something else. Either way, I think what I went through with these psychedelic experiences, it kind of showed me a different way to look at it. Whatever happens afterwards, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. We'll figure it out. But the viewpoint that I have on it now as I'm living is definitely changed from when before I had these experiences, for sure. And other people can attest to that as well. I think there's a lot of people that kind of don't really view their deaths in the same way as they did before a psychedelic experience, if integrated correctly, if done with the right, ceremonial aspect. And it's amazing. Like, isn't that so liberating? Like, what is a more liberating idea to our psyche than being able to not fear dying, or at least have, like I said, a different viewpoint of it? Because our entire world, that's the number one thing in all of our heads. Most likely, like deep down, I'm pretty sure people's biggest fear is dying. And we just, like you said, we like to shoo it away. We like to not think about it. But I mean, it sounds morbid, but I think about it every day. But I don't think about it as in like, oh shit, am I gonna die? I don't want to go out of the house. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. If anything, it gives me more volition to live, knowing that this could be it. Today could be my last day. It gives me um, more gumption in my actions. It gives me more just vitality because it makes me want to live. Like while I am here in this temporary existence, known as Gary, in this body, I'm gonna do uh, the best of my ability to create a better world for other people that are also in this experience with me. It gives me like a sense of, uh, I guess, encouragement to live this temporary, fleeting life as we approach that inevitable death that I already experienced and simulated. It's a beautiful thing, man. It really is. And you know, people do mushrooms, ayahuasca, peyote, the list goes on, DMT, whatever it is. And I think the majority of people don't have that experience. They just do it. They just like the colors, they like the feelings, they like, which is all great. But I always like to ask people, like, all right, but what did what did you get from that? Was there anything like that you like know now, maybe you don't know, or maybe you think a little differently, or maybe you see the world a little differently? And I've spoken to a lot of people that just not on that wavelength that we're talking about right now, and it is unfortunate, but I think it is because we don't do it in the right way. Like you said, the Eleusinian mysteries and probably many other ceremonies and rituals like that, um, they set the standard for us to be able to use these things how they were supposed to be used, and which is like a whole plan. Like it's like they know exactly, like it's already like they're preparing to enter the spirit realm. That's essentially what it is. Like you're already almost there. You're approaching the door of the spirit realm before you go, and all you need to unlock the door is some chemical component. And then once you're there, it's like I guess you could say it's like a different universe. Maybe it's just expanding the universe a little bit more. You know, our viewpoint is right here. Maybe we're just seeing a little bit more. Either way, if you wanna, I don't want to say get the most from it, because it's not like we go to get there to get anything like egotistically. But I guess if you want to experience the most from it and have that direct experience, and really better yourself, become a more peaceful person, a happier person, um, yeah, you have to go through in the right way. 100%, 100%. And yeah, man, I don't really know what to ask you from here.
Well, also,
Well,
like you said, it's interesting because I remember reading a study and they asked people what their main fear was, and fear of death was interestingly number two. Number one was fear of public speaking.
I believe
and
that.
uh,
I believe it.
and but I think that also makes sense in a way because it comes from, as you said, not really pondering death or not really going into that. And so it seems kind of silly in a way to imagine that we would be more afraid of speaking in front of a group of people than we would death, because no matter how bad public speaking is, we'll still get out the other end from it, and we do know that, whereas death is a much bigger mystery. um, and there, even more recently, there's been a lot more kind of quote unquote scientific work about what's happening with a lot of these plants. And Johns Hopkins just did an amazing study where they were working with terminally ill patients, and I believe it was something like 3 out of 4 of those patients who worked with psilocybin, again in a ceremony, I would call it a ceremonial setting. Very different from maybe what some people would refer to as a traditional ceremonial setting, but in a more modern context, it was a ceremonial setting. They were in a very specific place. There was these people who had white lab coats on, or they had official titles like doctors and scientists, and they were given that, and they were given music to listen to, and a very specific kind of objective of what to work with and what to look for. And 3 out of 4 of those people described that experience as one of the top 3, if not the top most profound experience of their lives. And And these people who were in a way forced to look at death because they were given a diagnosis that you only have X amount of time to live, and a relatively short amount of time. So that was very much in their consciousness, very much in their awareness. And they came out of that experience, and as many people would describe, they had a sense of peace after that. They weren't so afraid of dying. They would often use words like God, like I was kissed by God, I was held by God, and I was shown this beauty, and that I realized that I don't need to be afraid of where I'm going. And that's a tremendously beautiful thing. And also, as you mentioned, why are some people's experiences different? Well, a big thing is who is the person coming to that experience? What are they looking for? What are the stakes that they're willing to go into? Like, what is that longing within them that's what is it looking for? And ultimately, if we are looking to experience pretty objects and colors and to have that kind of experience, it's much more likely that that's what we're going to experience. If we are on our deathbeds and we go in with that kind of knowledge of how can I come to peace with this, that very well may be where the experience is heading towards. So, much like I think is a very uh, kind of quantum physicist idea of looking at the world, like you can't separate the observer and the observed. Even with these plant medicines, you can't take away the person who's going through that experience. That person brings a tremendous amount to that experience, and so what they're looking for, what their capacity is, has a tremendous amount of impact in that experience. You look at ancient Egypt. I mean, it seems like so much of all of those elaborate rites and rituals was preparing people for the death experience, and ultimately being able to free oneself when one entered the underworld and was judged, that their heart had to be as light as a feather. And I think that's very symbolic of through this life shedding away all of those things that are keeping us heavy, that are weighing us down, all of the hatred, the anger, the judgment, the fears, and slowly beginning to release those, so that when we come to our final judgment, our heart is free and we're able to enter, as they would say, the afterlife, or the life of eternity. So yeah, it's that's a huge part, again, as you said, is the set and setting.
Mm. Yeah, that's powerful, man. It's healing. Like it's like we're sick. Like we're born here in this body, not 100%. There's something wrong, I guess, in a way. Even though it's not, there's nothing wrong. It's all perfect. But it's like we have to do some kind of work here. We're not just here to hang out. It seems like we're here to heal our being collectively, at least at this point in time. I don't know how it's going to be in the future. Maybe we'll all be perfect beings, but it seems like we're not aligned with that, like kind of like a vibrational frequency of just creating a better world, creating a better life for yourself, truly healing yourself. There's something like we're just stuck. Like we're not, from a young age, at least in the Western world, we're not conditioned on that mindset. We're not, there's no sense of healing. It's just kind of, if you have a problem, here's some pills. If you have some kind of ailment, just treat it. Don't exactly heal yourself. It's just kind of something where you just treat it, ignore it, move on, go on Netflix. It's not something that we don't take the time, it seems, to really dive deep into our beings. I mean, we're getting there, definitely. Just by us having this conversation is proof that, like, people all over the world are actually, like, wait a second, hold on a second. Let me try and live a little bit differently. Let me try and help myself. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to heal yourself, I think, to be able to be on that wavelength. Not saying that I'm 100% a healed individual. What I'm saying is that as long as you can get yourself on that mindset of that you are the healer, that you are the one that is capable of truly seeing past what you think is holding you back, and then truly living the life and living your purpose here. Because I think we all have even though we're all going to perish in these bodies, I think we all have a purpose of why we came to incarnate in these bodies. And it's different for everybody, but I think there's no accidents in this universe. We're all here for some kind of reason. And these plant medicines, if used in the right way, deprogram us from the reason that we've been told, and they allow us, if used correctly, to program us ourselves into our dharma, as they say, our essence of why we're supposed to be here, like a kind of alignment with, maybe some say, God, infinite consciousness, the one, whatever you want to call it, the source. A lot of different names for it, but it allows me at least to align myself with a purpose that's greater than just fulfilling my sensual pleasures, more than just trying to have some fun. It's like, it's realizing that this whole, what it means to be a human being, goes way greater than just trying to enjoy it, even though enjoying it is 100% part of the journey. But I think in order to truly enjoy it, to truly get the most out of what it means to be here, you need to live for something, like find enjoyment in the journey itself. And if you're just living day to day, just kind of going through the motions, just trying to feel good and trying to uh, trying to shoo away not feeling good, you're missing the point. Like, I think there's a purpose for all of us here, whether it's being the shaman, being the painter, being a cook, being a race car driver, whatever it is. I don't know, it's different for everybody, but we all have to come to that realization within ourselves. And I think it's possible, and it's possible because of these plant medicines. I don't know, you can definitely do it without it, for sure, like 100%. You could follow your dharma, follow the dharma, the reason why we're here, the purpose of this universe, the way, some may say. You can follow that and get aligned with that. It's just, sometimes you need that spark, you know what I mean? Like, you need that, like, that catalyst to be able to find the path. And then once you can find that path, you have to walk it. We all have to walk it. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it's definitely possible. Like, do you think you would be aligned with the spirit that you're on right now, that you're aligned to, the frequency that you're aligned to, if it wasn't for plant medicine? Like, what were you before ayahuasca, or whatever you decide to take? And then what are you like now? Like, what's the before and after like? And do you think you'd be able to be in the mindset and headspace that you're in now if it wasn't for ayahuasca or the other plant medicines?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think sometimes these kind of dichotomies, that they're useful, like you spoke about in the West, and I often use those too, because like anything, when we reduce things, we can begin to compartmentalize and speak about things. But even behind you, for example, there's a statue of Buddha, and that's a what we would call an Eastern person. And yet he was speaking to exactly what you were speaking of 2,000 years ago in Nepal, in India, and pointing towards that very same thing, saying that suffering is inherent, and it wasn't just inherent to people in the East or people in the West. It was universally. It was the human condition, that there's something that was missing, something that we're all longing for. They speak a lot about that in a lot of the indigenous communities in the Amazon, that there was this calling, that humanity was suffering, and so that there was this calling, and spirit answered. And without going too much into it, they would say some of these people have these stories, like that spirit answered the calling, and they transcended the 12 dimensions of time and space, and came upon this beautiful earth. But they saw that humanity was lost in the madness, the madness of, they would call, the theater of life, and they had forgotten who they were. They had forgotten where they came from.
Maya.
And so they brought these plant medicines to be able to aid these people to remember who they were, to remember them where their home was. And so, as you said, these things were tools. And like any tool, is it necessary? No. I mean, you can have a nail and you don't need a hammer to put that nail in.
Mm.
You can find a rock, you can find a log, but that hammer is designed to very well to nail that nail into its place. And I think the fascinating thing about a lot of these plants are that, yeah, I think it, like many people were still under this impression that almost like these plants are somehow cheating, because it's like we're taking something from the outside to try and spark something that's on the inside.
Mm.
And that was even something I used to think about. But I think that's actually an incorrect way of looking at it, because none of these plants are introducing anything from the outside. All they're doing is turning on something that's already dormant from the inside. We
Mhm.
already have these receptors built into our bodies. So that's, in a way, those are the hammers or like a key that's unlocking something that's already inside of us. We have all these receptors that are already in us, that these plants are activating, that these things are laying dormant, almost waiting to be activated. And again, to disregard the tremendous amount of respect and reverence and stories and beliefs that so many people around the world have, that the power of these plants offer us. And so, yes, they are tools, but they were considered tools of the highest order. And as you said, in a way, I think many of the other spiritual practices that people may be familiar with, things like going out into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights and not eating, and going into a cave, a dark cave, and doing a similar thing, or going on a vision quest, fasting, chanting. All of these things are really doing the same thing that a plant medicine is doing.
Everything all right?
Yeah. Somehow,
I can hear you.
are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Somehow my computer screen just switched off.
Oh,
But
we're
yeah,
good
it
to
looks
go.
like I'm back.
We're back.
But that essentially, all of these things are, as you said, tools, and they're different ways to access the same thing. I think these plants have just been seen as a very direct way to access that, and a very, very powerful tool. Um, if we can find another way, then great. It's not that inherently one way is better than another way. Um, but again, I think when people look all over the world, I think there's a growing body of evidence that shows that so many of these spiritual traditions use these plants to induce that experience, to be able to truly learn. And that's why these plants are often referred to as teacher plants, that they're actually teaching us something, that as you kind of alluded to, like we're born in this, some people may say we're born in a state of wholeness and then we begin to lose that, or we are born incomplete, and the goal of life is to find that completion. Well, in order to do that, it's kind of a paradox, because we have to do something. There's a saying in Zen, which is, in order to find, we have to seek. But then, as long as we're seeking, we'll never find. And I think that points to something very profound. We can't do nothing and expect to change. We have to do something. We have to go on a journey. We have to seek. But ultimately, in a way, that seeking is to go back into the essence of who we are, which has been described as, in various ways, but as home, as God, as this ever eternal present moment, as the here and now. But we have to go on that journey, and however we go on that journey, we will need teachers, we will need tools, we will need teachings that can help to aid us in that. And so to disregard any teaching that through time immemorial people have given a tremendous amount of respect and reverence to, I think would be silly, and it would be a bit arrogant. And I think that's where a lot of our suffering comes from, is because in that arrogance, we're very quick to dismiss these things because we maybe can't understand them, or we're actually afraid to go into them. And so we avoid them. But in that avoidance, we end up perpetuating the very thing that's keeping us unhappy or suffering from the beginning. So very much as you said, it's not that any of these plants are inherent. They're all gifts, and that's how they've always been seen. They've been seen as gifts from spirit, and if we're able to use those in a way that honors that, then there's a tremendous amount of teaching to be had from that.
Oh yeah. I think Terrence McKenna has a story that he's told where there's a monk that brags to the people and he says, "I have meditated for 40 years. Behold, and now I'm able to levitate to the other shore of the river, the other shore of existence." And he's telling the village people, and then one of the other villages just says, "Well, yeah, but the ferry is only 5 cents." So it's kind of like that same idea. We're all going to the other shore, but it's just, I guess, how you decide to get there. And the other shore is just like a different way to live, a different mindset. Like, yeah, and a certain alignment that you can tune yourself to. I always wonder, do you think, like, I had this thought the other day, uh, maybe in the future we're not going to need these medicines, like, even though they are part of our past and they're coming up. There's, we're living through the psychedelic renaissance, some people say. Do you think in the future we're not going to need these because we are going to be the being that we were supposed to be? Because if we need these teachers and we need certain healers, that implies that we're sick. So do you ever think that we'll reach a point in the human condition where we don't need to be healed? We're on that mindset of, where we need to be. Do you foresee that, or do you think we have this kind of alliance with these plant medicines that are like a part of our being? They're forever, pretty much, as long as we're human and we're not, you know, cyborgs. As long as we're in this organic body, do you think we have this certain special relationship with the plant medicines and essentially the earth?
I think so, yeah, and it's a great question. But much like I think you said, is we are human organisms, and no matter how much we get away from that, we can never avoid the fact that we are humans. And what does it mean to be human? Again, I think the pandemic is a really good example of that. Like, what does it mean to be alive? Like, is is human touch important? Is community important? Is love important? Is connection important? And if the answer is no, then we could potentially remain locked down in our houses forever and everything would be fine. But I think, as hopefully we've already begun to see, and we will begin to see, that's an antithesis to life. Life can't survive like that. As a human organism, we require certain things. We require water, we require food, we require sunshine, and that's on the physical level. On a mental, emotional level, we require love, we require connection, we require kindness, and on the spiritual level, we require a quest to understand who we are, our place in the world. What does it mean to be alive? And I think those are things that we can never get around. And again, going back to that idea of the Buddha, again, that's what he was pointing towards, is that there's this longing, there's this suffering that's inherent to a human being. And no matter how technologically advanced we get, it's another really interesting topic. Like, as you were saying, like, as we begin to merge more with AI, and how far down that road can we get? And ultimately, I don't think there's still a limit to that, because as long as we're a human being, we can't get away from the fact that we're a human being, and that requires certain things. And also, I think a lot of traditional cultures point to this idea that, which is very different from in our modern world, how we look at things, which is that the time is linear and we're constantly growing. And this point in humanity is the most advanced ever, and it's only going to get more. And yet, to my knowledge, that's not how ever any traditional society has ever looked at the world. They always look at it in terms of cycles, in terms of birth and death, much like a heartbeat. A heartbeat isn't continuously getting faster and moving towards a non-beating state. It's always expanding, contracting, expanding, contracting. Our breath is the same thing. Breath, it comes from the word respirar, which means to be filled with spirit. So spirit has always been correlated to the idea of breath. And again, this idea of expansion, contraction, that's what it means to be alive, to expand and to contract. If you look from like a Taoist perspective, it's the same thing. It's always the balance between night and day, action and non-action, doing and non-doing. And those are universal principles. And I think those are things that we can't get away from, because that's actually that's what it means to be alive. If we get away from those things, there would be no more life. And so in that way, again, I think looking at these ancient ideas, that we go through cycles, and we may go through cycles where we are in a much more elevated state of consciousness, a place where we don't need as much healing, because maybe that healing has been done on a personal level, on a societal level, on a worldwide level. And we live in a golden era, an era of beauty and peace and love and community, and where we're operating on a you may say a higher level. And then we may end up in darker eras, like the Dark Ages, where it's a period of warfare, of suppression, of poverty, of disease and sickness. And I would imagine that's how life will continue. And so there's always this longing, there's always this search. It's a constant, in a way, battle between lightness and darkness. And much like a pendulum, we can swing to different extremes. And in a way, that's just how the universe works, is we have to go to those extremes to then begin to realize the things that are lacking. And again, much like the Buddha was pointing towards, it's to find the middle way. But we seem as humans to never be able to hold that. Even like that word sin in a Christian sense, it comes from that idea of missing the mark, missing the center, like an archer who's always trying to hit the center, but we never quite do. We're always a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, a little bit too high, a little bit too low. And so it's a constant process of trying to come to the center. And I think another universal principle is this idea that we're never always in the center. We always are a little bit off center, and we constantly have to come back.
Yeah. I think the beginning to centering yourself is the awareness. Like first becoming aware that that's what you just described was, first of all, that was great. That was beautiful. And I think it starts with, this whole journey, this whole spiritual process, this whatever we're going through, whatever we're talking about here. It's like realizing that, being a human being, we're faulty beings. We're not exactly perfect yet. We're perfectly imperfect, or imperfectly perfect. And there is some kind of there's something that we're trying to do here. It's like to stay in that flow state, in a way, to recognize the ups and the downs of this life. And that's just that's yin and yang. That's the story of this world. I put at the simplest level, this universe it's cyclic in nature, cyclic, whatever the word is. It's it's a cycle. And the thing is we are part of that cycle. We are that cycle. Like there's some kind of the viewpoint that we're talking about throughout this whole conversation is it aligns me at least more with that cycle. It helps me realize that I am of this world. I am in this world. I am the world. I am the universe. And that helps me understand a lot more my place in this body, in this universe, knowing how it's all cycles, everything, no matter how large or how small it is, it doesn't really matter. Like whatever the reaction, as we move through time, we are constantly moving through in this nature of cycles of on and off, life and death, just polarity, black and white. But I think, yes, the purpose, if there is a purpose to being a human being, is to finding the gray area, is to being able to align yourself with the gray area, non-duality, to be able to not splay too much to one side or the other, and to ride the line. Like being a human being is somewhere we're in the middle. We're alive, yet we're dead at the same time. It's a very far out idea. It's like we're in between. We are the in between of these cycles. If you are able to reach that non-dual state, you realize that non-dual state is between everything and nothing at the same time. We're between life and death. And that's the flow. That's the Tao. That's the forever flow that we're on. And yeah, like you said, it's for some reason it's just hard to stay on that. I think that's the journey though. That's the path. Like why we're here is to be able to align ourselves with that. And then maybe it goes beyond this body. Once you can align yourself to that, maybe it extends into another lifetime, or you become another being after you're dead in this body, or you evolve into something else. Who knows? Nobody really knows. But I think there is a certain sense of tuning in to something, that mindset that we just spoke about. And then once you tune in, yeah, you're probably going to tune out here and there. You're going to get lost in the sauce, as I like to say. Your mind is just going to get sucked into some happening of the world, some drama of your life maybe, but you can always tune back in to that sense of connectivity with the flow, with the cyclic nature of this universe. And from there, man, that's liberation to me. It's an ultimate liberating of the story that we like to tell ourselves, the story of our egos, where our egos tell us to be afraid, that you can't do this, to fall into the narrative that we've been programmed into. That's not the true narrative. You can tune into the real narrative of what it means to be a human being. And that's a process that never really ends. I think once you tune in, it's a forever tuning in process. You don't just tune in and that's it. It's to me at least, it's like just constantly being able to, as long as I am able to tune the radio dial to that frequency, that's the most important thing. The frequency dial may go to different stations here and there. That's okay. We have the tools. We have the practices that allow us to be able to tune in to the forever flow, as I like to call it, the Tao, the way, whatever word you want to put on it. There's a certain kind of alignment that I think we can all get there. And yeah, I like how you said it's like, yeah, that is just part of the human condition. It's like almost like being, it's like we're here to figure out what we are. And if these plant medicines are here for us to kind of teach us what we are in a certain way, then yeah, as long as we're human, we're going to probably need these things until we are these cybernetic organisms that have reached singularity and know everything about this world, if that's even what we're going toward. As long as we're in this organic meat suit, then yeah, most likely I agree with you. We're going to need these things because just the simple condition of being a human is it's dukkha. It's the first noble truth. It's a sense of dis-ease in your life. And dis-ease, we have to heal our dis-ease with these medicines. So yes, man, 100% I agree with you. Makes a lot of sense. I think though, I don't know. Someday, yeah, like you said, that we might reach a part in the cycle where we're not going to need those. We're going to be aligned. We'll have this, like, I guess maybe heaven on earth, some would say. But maybe, yeah, we'll just go back into the cycle, reach the dark ages. I don't know, man. It's all just this flow. It's all just a cycle. That's really zooming out at the picture of this universe. That's a viewpoint that is hard for a lot of people to see. Like the yugas, like Kali Yuga, Sat Yuga, that the enormity of time, the enormity of our universe is a viewpoint that is it's like when you look at life like that, and life more than just your life, like life in general, like consciousness, the evolution of consciousness, I guess it gives more of a glimpse into the cycles, like how this is just one giant cycle. If what they say is true with the yugas, and we go through different ages of our consciousness, it gives a little bit more credence to the idea of cycles. And we don't pay attention to cycles at a large, like cycles don't really make sense to like a large array of time. But yeah, if you're able to zoom out and kind of do that, which may seem a little scary, it makes sense that yeah, we're just on the flow. This is all just the we're all just on the flow of life, on down floating down the river of life. It's a beautiful thing. I think it's a sense of liberation. Like, how do you feel now that you know that this is like a thing? That not that it's like a thing, but now that you have this idea of your humanly vessel, do you feel like a sense of? Do you feel more at peace? Like, do you feel like more placement in this world, like a sense of purpose? Like I said.
I think, like you said, that that idea of perspective is super, super valuable, and it's something that we often forget about. And I think that's why all of these teachings are so important, because they do give us perspective. Like you're mentioning the yugas, these tremendous amount of times of cycle, 25,000 years being a great year, a great cycle. I mean, that's hard for anyone to imagine, and yet these people were pointing towards that a long, long time ago. And even in the Vedas, at the end of the Vedas, they say, or so this is what the ancient ones told us. And I think for many people, that makes no sense, that there was all of this knowledge a long time ago. And according to them, there was even a higher knowledge before that they were being taught. And I think, like you said, so much of our disease comes from not putting things in perspective, not looking at things from a bigger angle. And when we do that, it's very easy to get lost in the details, and we forget about the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very symptomatic of a lot of illness and a lot of disease. Is as we become more specialized, we lose the general practitioners, we lose the doctors who can see things not just in the minute, but who can see it from a wider expanse, and to say, oh yes, like I recognize that problem, but that problem also isn't inherently just a symptom of that problem. It's also coming from something from a bigger lens. And so
Mm-hmm.
how do we treat that in a bigger lens? And then hopefully that symptom begins to go away. But if we're just constantly trying to treat the symptom, we forget about what's inherently behind that. And I think that's what one of the real beauties of these plant medicines are, as you were also pointing towards, is this sense of really connecting us to nature. And it's also a very common theme that you see in a lot of spirituality or religious traditions, is this idea of being very wary of idolatry. Because when we begin to worship idols, we become lost in the minute, we become lost in the literal, and we forget the allegorical, we forget the bigger picture of what these things are actually pointing towards. And then we get lost in the identification of, well, this statue is God, or this book is literal truth and we have to follow it to the T, otherwise we're going to go to hell. And I think what these plants are also pointing towards is this deep connection to nature and to natural principles. And those principles transcend time and space. They're not just of this era, they're of epochs and of time and space and time immemorial. And if we can begin to learn from those, then we can begin to apply those in the here and now in a much more principled way, in a much more in a way that embodies wisdom. So I think, to answer your question, I think ultimately any of these practices, and certainly plant medicine, if we go into it really deeply, again, with that true desire and that true knowledge to understand, we can be left with a sense of peace. Because even in the chaos, we can see that's also part of these cycles. And it's also it's a small blip in the history of time and space. and that we've gone through cycles that are far greater, far more impactful than what we may be going through now. And that's not that, again, we don't take action, or we don't become very impassioned about something, because we can, because from a higher place we can see, like, oh, this thing is out of alignment with natural principle, with natural law, therefore it's not life-giving, it's not life-serving. So how can I take a stance that's in support of life, that's in support of union, that's in support of love, but base that on these much bigger principles and this much bigger understanding? um, and like anything, it's, I think even like these ideas of enlightenment have really been misconstrued as something permanent. And again, if we look at the laws of nature, one of the laws is that nothing is permanent. Everything is fleeting. Everything has a birth and a death to it. And so this idea that, like any of us are just sitting like in an ultimate state of peace or happiness is also out of alignment with nature, with truth, and that always we're going to be tested. And, and it's a constant practice of coming back to the center, coming back to the center, coming back to the center. And, but if we can cultivate those things, if we can learn from those things, then that practice becomes easier and we're better able to do that. But it's never inherently something where, even the Buddha, like he wasn't just sitting on some mountaintop, just in a state of bliss. He realized that his mission was to go back out into the people and to be with the people, to teach, much like a shaman or a curandero. Like they're not just sitting in the middle of the woods somewhere in a state of ecstasy. Like they realize that in this human form, their goal is to help, to go into the shit. I mean, literally, like if you're working with ayahuasca, you're dealing with shit, you're dealing with vomit, you're dealing with pain, you're dealing with suffering. And those are things that sometimes you take on, that you have to constantly go into, to constantly try and bring order to. And it's not inherently just some, la la woo woo, like I'm sitting here in the state of peace. It's of this earth, it's of this world. It's really dancing and flowing with all of these different things that arise.
Mm, yeah. Well said, man. Amen. I like how you said, bring order. You're gonna bring order or something. I think that's a good word. Like you kind of like this world is chaos. It is a very chaos. It is of chaos. But there's a certain that alignment we're talking about is a certain sense of bringing a sense of orderliness into this world, and it's through love. I like to think that love is order in the chaos. There's some kind of like connection. There's something about the love that you cultivate for other people that I don't know. It's just for me. It just yeah. There is like a certain order. It's a good word. I'll just keep it at that.
Mhm.
Oh man. Do you I mean I think we could probably wrap it up at that. The journey is the destination, I guess we could probably say as the last words. Do you have anything that you'd like to say to the world before we wrap it up?
No, just I think anyone like yourself who's doing this work is bringing order, is doing just that. Is by that act of sharing, by that act of trying to teach, of listening, we are bringing order to the world, and trying to promote that love and that union, and an understanding. And I think that's super important, especially in the time we're in, where there is so much confusion, and so much of this sense of I know, and that I know mind wants to control, and uh, to bring order, not out of a state of love, but out of a state of control and force and power.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I think sharing from these places is so beautiful, because it is about self-empowerment, and it's about really honoring life and all of its manifestations and all of its beauty, and really understanding and flowing with that. So yeah, I think it's great what you're doing. And also, if people are interested in working with plants, as we said in the beginning, I think it is super important to find a really good set and setting, especially with some of these more powerful plants. It makes all the difference in the world. So finding good people to work with, finding a good setting, and really making sure that you want to, that there is that calling there, like a deeper calling to really go into it, because the benefits can be tremendous. And and it's also not for everyone, and it's not for everyone in every moment of their life. much like we were talking about Ulysses and the Dionysian rites, there was a time and a place in one's life to do that, and to really prepare oneself, and to have that deep desire to go into it. And when we have that, these things can be absolutely amazing. And like you were saying, like literally rewiring our brain, making us look at things differently. And that's a beautiful thing, but also a thing to really be respectful of. So finding good people, finding a good place, and finding people who do really good work.
Amen. Finding that good energy. I feel like we know deep down what's best for us in our heart. Like there's some kind of intuitive guidance that shows us the way. Like we don't want to chase the experience necessarily. We don't want to chase the high per se. We want to chase the change, chase the order. Like, we know like there's some kind of feeling. And I can recognize it. I don't know about you, but I think it's before we go into these experiences, definitely take the time for yourself to maybe practice a little bit of meditation. I would recommend, like kind of dive in yourself first on the regular and be able to find a little bit of quiet time in your own mind, and almost like prepare yourself before you go into these very amazing ecstatic experiences of the mind. That's what I would have to recommend. Set and setting, very important, extremely important. But yeah, thank you, Jason, so much for coming on here. This is a wonderful conversation. You're a very wise man. I appreciate your energy and your time coming on here on the mic and in front of the camera. Um, Other than that, yeah, let's keep doing our thing. Let's keep spreading the good word, I guess. Let's keep learning. Let's always keep learning. That's key. Always, we don't always know everything. I think there's a certain sense of curiosity. Curiosity goes a long way in today's world. We like to think, like you said, we know everything and we got it all figured out. We have Google, we got Wikipedia. That's it. We know all about the world and this universe, but that's far from the truth, y'all. We have a long way to go, but the journey is the destination. I think we can kind of keep it at that. Find the flow, go with the flow of life, and you'll be all right. We're all gonna be all right. But
My
yeah,
pleasure,
thanks
Gary.
again.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the time, and I wish you all the best. And we'll keep in touch. Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds good to me. Other than that, have a good day. Have a good day to everybody that listened. And namaste. Peace out.